What I want to do today is kind of bookend what Will did on the first day and offer you some more cultural analysis. And I've titled my talk, The State of the Culture Ripe for Revolution, ? Now you probably can figure out what my answer is, otherwise I wouldn't be giving this talk. But I want to start this topic in a kind of an interesting way. Let me see if this works. I want you to imagine for a minute millions of little healing machines that could go into your body and that could isolate just the cancer cells and either turn them off or kill them before they kill you. Or for that matter, little teeny machines that could go into your brain and supplement damaged cells in order to stop the spread of Alzheimer's, or for that matter, even reverse it. Or imagine for a moment some material that's much stronger than anything that we can produce or have produced in the past, much stronger than steel. So strong that we could string it 25,000 miles into space, anchored on the Earth and anchored in a counterweight in space, and literally build an elevator that could simply go up and down between the Earth and space. Well, as many of you probably have surmised, I'm talking about nanotechnology. Now, we understand what engineering is. It's taking stuff, metal and other stuff, and putting them together and making machines, or mixing chemicals together to make new substances like plastics, or perhaps to make medicines to cure us. Nanotechnology is engineering on a molecular and even an atomic level, at a very, very small level. That's Eric Drexler is one of the pioneers of nanotechnology. And anyone who uses a computer, a cell phone, basically pretty much any of us, are using the products of nanotechnology, literally laying down circuits at a micro level. And I want you to think for a second about the knowledge that's needed to do this kind of engineering, to literally figure out how to manipulate matter on a molecular or an atomic level. Literally, how do you go about building a little nanobot that can detect just the cancer cells and figure out just how to put a poison in or to turn off the little genetic code so the cancer cell won't be doing bad things for you. Think of the kind of knowledge that it takes to create a carbon nanotube, which is this substance I mentioned that's so strong. That's the sort of thing people are working on in the United States as well as elsewhere today. This is exciting. I could give a whole lecture, and have given old lectures on advanced technology. But I want to put this in a certain context. Only 47% of Americans understand that electrons are actually smaller than atoms. Now you might say, so what? We can have rockets without having everybody as a rocket scientist. We can have automobiles without everybody being a mechanic. You know, that's interesting, Ed, but so what? Well, if you look at the 34 OECD advanced countries and look at the tests in terms of knowledge, you find that the United States, the country that everyone says, we put men on the moon and so forth, we're now number 20 out of 34. In math, we're number 27 out of 34. It seems compared to other countries, we're getting stupider. So I use that to introduce this question about whether the culture is ripe for the revolution. For a revolution, we look at politics and cultures and we see these deep contradictions. We see knowledge with individuals with knowledge and capacities that are just that literally used to be science fiction, then they became inspirational, then they became aspirational, now they're becoming actual. That's the kind of world we live in. This is exciting, but we also see the kind of deep ignorance among a lot of sectors of society. We find deep divisions in politics and cultures at almost every level, which of course is crippling technology, potentially crippling the economy, crippling individual progress, and of course, limiting liberty. I argue that the United States, the rest of the world for that matter, really the contradictions give us two potentials. The first potential is that the country and the culture can continue to decline, that we're going to be yesterday's country. It could be a slow, slow deterioration, almost like somebody with Alzheimer's, for those of you who've experienced that with a relative or a loved one, you know what a tragedy it is. Is our country going to look like that? Or are we going to be able to step back from the abyss, and not just step back, but to promote a fantastic non-fiction future, a world in which, a world as it can be and should be? Are we ripe for revolution in the culture as well as politics? Obviously, I'm going to argue that we are. So let me go through and make my case. First, as for those of you who have listened to me in the past, you know I always start off with the negative information, and unfortunately there's never a shortage of that. You take a look at the politics and culture today, and you see it's in pretty dismal shape. You see that the burden of government is strong and continues to grow. 80,000 pages in the Federal Register. Cost of government day is when you stop paying directly and indirectly for government and start working for yourself. During the Bush years, it was mid-June. Under Obama, it's mid-July. So you're still working for the government today, folks. That's how bad things have slipped in the last 6 to 7 years. The national debt, 2009, it was 77% of GDP. Today, it's over 100% of GDP. We're moving in the direction of Greece. On the index of economic freedom, which, as you know, that was my idea at Heritage to measure economic freedom. The United States, when I was putting this together, was up at the top. It was usually in the top 5. We're number 12 now behind Canada. So, you know, for those of our Canadian friends here, maybe we'll have to do one of these things in Vancouver again to go to a freer country. Needless to say, these government controls and regulations are strangling opportunity and autonomy. And of course, what's worse is the whole pattern where the government strangles opportunity and economic growth. We have less wealth, which means people want more government handouts, which the politicians are more than happy to give out. And of course, the more wealth distribution and regulation you have, the less wealth you have, which means people need more handouts still. It's this vicious downward cycle that we have. You also see the breakdown of political consensus. A constitution and a republic cannot work without some fundamental consensus. I argue that even 40 years ago, if you took most Democrats and tied them down and put sodium pentothal into their veins, they would say, yeah, I really do believe in a generally free market system with property rights, but we do need a little safety net just to make sure that, you know, people don't fall through the cracks. And maybe we need a little bit of tweaking with antitrust because, you know, sometimes businesses do get big, but we basically believe in the fundamentals. I argue today, and this is not just rhetorical, that consensus is gone. That especially in the Democrat Party, but elsewhere as well, the goal is power, power, power. There is a subclass of elites in the United States that just wants to manipulate. That's what their thing is. And you see political polarization. If you look at any kind of surveys, you find not only between Republican and Democrat, but under other ways. Look at the fact that Bernie Sanders, an avowed socialist, he's not even a socialist like Obama, who basically doesn't use the word, but that's what he is. He's an avowed socialist, and you see that now he's polling pretty well here in New Hampshire against Hillary Clinton. People are just to the point where, okay, well, he's a socialist. Okay, I guess that might be good. You take a look at the rise of arbitrary power. Now, I'm very pro-immigrant. I'm for making the so-called illegal immigrants a path to legality and citizenship. I'm very much in favor of those things. But take a look at Barack Obama, who simply with the stroke of a pen said, I'm going to ignore the law for 3 or 4 million people. I'm just going to do it like that. Okay? Just completely ignoring the rule of law and the fact that the law says X, Y, and Z. Now, I say to liberals, well, what would you think if a Republican president got in there and said, the tax system is so bad, I'm simply going to ignore it. Anyone who cheats on their taxes, you do whatever the hell you want, I'm simply not going to have that law enforced. That's it. End of discussion. Now, of course, the first thing I would do is probably stand up and cheer. But then I'd probably sit down and say, wait a minute, this is no longer a republic of laws. This is a republic of Caesars. Speaking of a republic of Caesars, you know, we see the seizure of the internet. We see Obama saying, I don't care whether there's a law or not, I'm simply going to use every executive order I can, and you guys try to do something about it. It reminds me of back when Andrew Jackson was president. He wanted to move the Indians from the east and take them 1,000 miles away and stick them on reservations. The Supreme Court said, no, it's illegal. Sorry, you can't do it. He says, I got the army. You don't. I'm doing it. That's the situation we're in today. And then just take a look at, of course, the crony system we all know about. We've done a lot of that at this conference, that more and more what determines who gets what is political pull. Take a look at the daily insults that we have to face with government. You know, we have a TSA that gropes us and looks at us naked, but can't even protect us. You saw where something like 90-some% of the tests to see if they were working got through. They somehow can seize, you know, my little shampoo thing because it's more than 4 ounces, but weapons still get through. And yet, this is what they do. Take a look at every month or so, I get one of these stories where the police are busting little elementary school kids running lemonade stands. My God, that's how one of the ways I got money when I was a kid. I ran a lemonade stand. Now I would be a criminal. This happens. There's the latest one. This was just from a few weeks ago. Here's one I just saw last week, and you know, you can ask my wife my reaction to this as I was bouncing off the walls. In a preschool, parents received this letter here. I'll just read it. It says, I have received word from the federal programs preschool pertaining to lunches. Parents are to be informed that students can only bring lunches from home if there is a medical condition and basically a physician's note. In other words, we've gone from parents providing lunches for their kids and the government just providing lunches so that there won't be starving kids in school, to a middle-class entitlement, to us people in school forced to gag down Michelle Obama lunches, to now the government saying you can't pack a lunch for your own child. That is what we've come to in this country. Okay, what about the culture that underlies these obscenities? Well, of course, resentment against achievement is one of the chief problems with this country. This is what happens with the welfare state, and this is the basis of the welfare state, is the notion that I'm poor, I want to have it, I resent you making it, and I resent the fact that you have it. I want to pull you down. I want what you have, and by the way, make more of it. It is something right out of Atlas Shrugged. And by the way, going hand in hand with this attitude is the notion is impotence and the notion of servility. You know, people who say this, you know, to give them, I don't want to give them credit, but to say where it's coming from, most of them feel impotent. Most of them feel, I can't do anything anyway, because this is what the welfare state teaches them. It teaches them you can't wipe your nose or tie your shoe without the government. It teaches impotence. We have a culture that more and more is skeptical to cynical. 59% of Americans believe that the American dream, that is progress as an individual, is impossible. 63% of 18 to 34 believe that. And by the way, these numbers were from about 2 years ago. I saw a poll about a week or so ago that essentially confirmed these numbers. You take a look at how much trust is there in the country today. Baby boomers, 40% said they generally trust people. Millennials, only 19% say they generally trust people. How many people see a difference between the Republicans and Democrats? It used to be half of baby boomers said, yeah, there's a difference, big difference. 31% of millennials say that there's a difference. Most millennials say, no, there's no difference. They're just all a bunch of political hacks, okay? What about confidence in organized religion? That's kind of interesting. That's taken a big dip in the last couple of years. 2001, 60% had some confidence in organized religion. This year, a poll just recently came out. It's down to 45%. 23% of Americans no longer offer any religious identification. Very interesting. But there is one area of unity I'm happy to report to you, okay? There's one area where we can all agree. And only 7% of people trust Congress. 93% of people agree that Congress is worthless. So there's a little bit of, is that a good news? I don't know. Anyway, there we go. I'm not cynical, I just take notes. Is this the kind of world we want to live in? Well, there's an even darker side. You think that that's dark. Take a look at the obsession in recent decades with collective identity and identity politics. If you want to talk about something morally as well as personally destructive, can't find much more than that accidents of birth should determine your self-identification, your sense of self-worth, to say nothing of your government entitlements. And you see this mostly, of course, in minority communities, especially in inner cities. Since Martin Luther King's wonderful speech, which I sat in my grandmother's living room when the rally was going on right outside of Washington, D.C. Since he said that he sees the day, he has a dream that someday people will be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Since that day, something like 400,000 blacks have been murdered by other blacks. That's 7 Vietnam Wars worth of bodies. A couple of weekends after the riots in Baltimore, I think there were 11 or 12 murders. People were rioting over the death of a possibly innocent man, but that's what was happening in Baltimore the week after. You see the race hustlers coming to the fore, not treated like we would treat Ku Klux Klansmen, but treated with respect. You have this vile creature here, Al Sharpton, one of the worst. He's been to the White House 60 times. That's not just for a courtesy cup of coffee. He's going there and he's talking to the race hustler premier, Barack Obama. And that's what's happening to our culture. Here's one that I find particularly interesting. What I call the endorse my narrative demand. This is kind of a version of doublethink. For those of you who remember Orwell, doublethink is this notion of holding a contradiction in your head, okay, concerning the regime and concerning reality. And of course, what it entails in Orwell is a blanking out. You don't think too much about the fact that you have this and then have this and they contradict each other. You just blank out. Well, we have something that's even worse than what Orwell imagined. We have people who come up with a narrative, and what they do is they don't blank out the facts. They resent the fact that you present them with facts, okay? Just 2 examples. We've seen a number of these rape reports on campus that turned out to be bogus. Now, by the way, I don't doubt that there are real problems, with rape on campus and abuses and all, but the report clearly comes out to be bogus. And what happens is the people who are pushing it are resentful of the fact that you're pointing out the fact, that they don't deny that it's bogus. You had the same thing with out in Ferguson, hands up, don't shoot. Now, by the way, I want to add, I've been a police commissioner, okay? I had to fire a couple of officers. I understand that abuses are not a fiction, that there are real abuses out there, okay? But even given that, you have a situation where it turns out this whole hands up, don't shoot, the guy was doing that, was a fiction, but people keep saying it anyway because it fits the narrative. So you talk about evasion of reality. Well, there you have it. Okay, what I want to argue is, now turning to the good side, the bright side of the force, you might say. I argue, and this is going back to my introduction, that we do have a bright part of the population, and that are the achievers. These are people who come in many different flavors, you might say. You see immigrants who come to this country so that they can stand out in front of Home Depot and work their butts off and better a life for them. You see blacks in the inner city who are desperate to get their children out of the crime-ridden schools. Any of you who've seen the movie Waiting for Superman, if you haven't seen it, you should see it. It's powerful. And then when you realize that these people, this was about the District of Columbia, D.C., I realized that one of the first things that Barack Obama did when he got into office was to get rid of the vouchers that allowed mostly black parents to get their kids out of crime-ridden schools and put them in safe schools where they could actually learn. You see the Silicon Valley sort that I've already alluded to, who basically have what I call the values of a Rourke but need the politics of a John Galt. They value human reason. They have individual goals. They love their lives. These are the people who are doing nanotechnology. These are people who are doing life extension. These are people who are doing all of these wonderful things. And you have what I call the young and the restless. These are the millennials who are looking for something positive in the culture, something positive for their future. Now, you, of course, can juxtapose this against the airheads, who come in many flavors as well. You have the miserable minorities who riot in the street, who burn down things rather than try to build up things. You have the middle class mush for brains. Any of you who watch Fox News and watch Water's World, where this guy goes out and he asks people questions, mostly young people, and they have no clue. This kind of came out of Jay Leno did this thing, jaywalking. They put up a picture of, let's say, the vice president and say, who is this? Gosh, I don't know. These are mainly, white middle class people that, fairly prosperous places. You see this in the middle class. This isn't just a minority community thing. And of course, you see the elite idiots, basically members of Congress who have no clue how the economy works. They pass minimum wage laws, for example, because they know it'll make everyone better, even though it throws people out of work. And you have civic illiteracy as well. We've heard a number of talks that pointed those out. Only 36% of Americans can name all three branches of government, and yet they vote. Only 35% can't name any branches of government, and they vote. In 2014, 62% didn't know which party controlled the House, and 62% didn't know which party controlled the Senate. But I argue that there's a synergy between the achievers and those of us who love liberty, that those who favor achievement need liberty, that those who favor liberty need those who need that liberty and need those who can use that liberty to create a better world. Okay, in order to spark a revolution, we have to first, as it were, dry the tinder off. And there's going to be a number of sort of, you might say, value or assumptions that will oppose us sparking a revolution. I'm going to go through very quickly and mention some of these and the need to how to deal with them. I'll probably take more than 5 minutes, but anyway, thanks for the heads up. Well, the first thing you have to do is you have to drain the altruist swamp. Now, we know what philosophical altruism is, but that's not what I'm talking about here. Most people, I think, who we might call altruists, really have mixed goals. And many of them really are basically benevolent. They want to see a better world. They don't want to see people in poverty. These are all very good motivations. So when we address the altruist sentiment, we have to try to not just denounce people for being altruists, but understand a lot of it's coming from benevolence. So let's be positive. Let's say, yes, you are right. I don't like to live in a neighborhood where I see destitution and all, but what I want to do is see my neighbors in power. I'll get to that point in a little bit, a minute. We see the equality swamp. This to me is even tougher than altruism, because I believe, and some might disagree with me here, that we actually have an inherent tendency to somehow think that unequal is bad. And probably 100,000 years ago, if one caveman had 20 times more, it's probably because they stole it, because we didn't have manufacturing. Today, that's not the case. But the point is, you still have this tendency, both ideological, if not inherent, to see that someone has more, there must be a problem. They must have stolen. And this is, of course, becoming more and more the leitmotif of the Democrat Party. It's been there all along, but it's even more. You can counter this by emphasizing who earned it and why do others deserve it. And I have a whole chapter in my book on that. The give back swamp is another one. You hear people talking about the need to give back, but don't you need to give back? Well, first of all, of course, you didn't take it if you got it honestly. But the other thing is, quite often, this sentiment comes from the notion of gratitude. And if you can't have gratitude towards God, if you're not religious, well, gratitude towards whom? Well, there's this notion that I think is inherent in humans that I'm happy, I want to celebrate, I want other people to join in the joy and the celebration. So I'm going to do something good for the community because, I'm just that happy. So when you deal with this one, again, don't assume that people are malicious. The philosopher king swamp is one that's still around. It shouldn't be, but it's still around. And this is the perception that somehow experts know better. And I go to a lot of these websites where I post my stuff on free markets and technical stuff, and I still see this one coming up. But it's a pretty easy one to knock down, to point out that the revolutions we're experiencing today, communications, information, and so forth, most of these things the experts said, nah, can't happen, won't work. Well, guess what? It did. The point is that the rule of experts, that's so 1930s. This is from the movie Things to Come. It's a great 1936 movie. That's H.G. Wells, a good socialist who thought the rule of experts would work. Well, it didn't. The crony swamp we've already talked about. I just want to say one thing about the crony swamp, is that you have a lot of these people, some people might say Elon Musk is one of them, where there's a danger that you have achievers who are doing incredible things, and then the government comes along and says, this is really great, we'd like to contract with you to help us. And they say, okay, well, that sounds pretty good. But there's a problem with sometimes it going over the line, and now instead of you providing a service, let's say, you're dependent on government. That's one you have to be very careful about. The Gaia swamp is still out there, sadly, that we have to dry up and that you're going to encounter as you push good stuff. And that's this notion that you go from wanting a clean environment for humans to wanting to clear the environment of humans. And this is a very deep one, by the way. But I'll show you something, a reaction to it in a minute. And finally, the fear of robot swamp. This is a version of the precautionary principle. The precautionary principle is this notion that if you can't prove something is completely safe, or if you can imagine that there are dangers associated with a new technology, a new invention, a new substance or whatever, well, you should just not do it or ban it until it's proven safe. Well, as you know, you can't prove a negative. And if you did that, most of the world today wouldn't be there. What, fire? I don't know. That sounds a little bit dangerous. Couldn't it burn down houses? And if we learn how to build houses, which we haven't yet, but and so, so you do see this, and actually you see this among a lot of intelligent people. You see Elon Musk, you see Bill Gates, you see Stephen Hawking, you see intelligent people succumbing to this. There's a whole argument I'll have to write more about our robots taking our jobs. You really don't have to worry about that one. Okay, so this is the tinder that we have to dry off. How do we spark the revolution? Okay, now I'm coming to the, spark. Okay, well, first of all, I'll just say a word. I'm departing a little bit from the outline in the brochure here. What you're going to do before you can spark a revolution, you're going to have things going on culturally. A lot of the problems we have today didn't start immediately, didn't start at one point. It was a gradual buildup. So you're always going to have a slow change at the fundamental level because, after all, you're dealing with real individuals with real priorities, expectations, assumptions, etc. And it takes a while for those to change. And usually they change it generationally. In other words, older people retire and die out, younger people come in, and that's why you have to aim at the younger people. But when you reach a certain point, then cultural as well as political change can happen fairly quickly. Politics, remember, is the lagging edge, so don't focus on politics first. Okay, here are a few of the sparks. This is one I've been playing around with for a while, and I've been test marketing. This is the human achievement spark. This is using as kind of an integrating meme, you might say, the notion that life should be about individuals seeking achievements. And I mean, in a sense, it's natural, but it's more of a matter of consciousness raising. This is a meme that, and I like to say, whether you're nurturing a child to maturity or a business to profitability, whether you're writing a song or a poem or a business plan or a dissertation, whether you're laying the bricks to the building, or financing the building, or designing the building. These are all achievements. This is what gives you a sense of fulfillment and meaning in life. That this is a good meme that when we approach cultural and value questions to put up front. It involves always the individual. It's your dreams, it's your life, it's the thing that you want to do that's exciting you. To create the means of your physical survival. It requires reason, it requires thinking. You can't just sit there passively and have it happen. It does deal with personal fulfillment. And by the way, you take a look, and I cut out a bunch of slides because I knew Will was going to tell me that I was over time anyway. You see Google and a whole lot of others putting literally billions of dollars. There's one guy who controls a portfolio at Google that has, I think it's reached about $2 billion with a B dollars, just putting it in sort of people who are doing interesting things in life extension and medicine and so forth. And then I could go over a whole lecture on this. There's a lot of money in it. There's a lot of people who are doing this, but they need a self-consciousness that what they're doing, their enterprise, is human achievement. That is their highest value, and it should be the highest value for all of us. I always like this Steve Jobs quote, "Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. Don't be trapped by dogma, which is thinking with the results of other people's thinking, living with the results of other people's thinking. Don't let the noise of others' opinions drown out your own inner voice, and most important, have the courage to follow your heart and your intuition." Very individualist statement there from Steve Jobs. One of the things that to emphasize in our cultural battles is the importance of being the entrepreneur of your own life. This is the notion that this is what empowers you, this is what gives you autonomy. This counters the cynicism that we see in the culture that I've outlined. It counters the notion that if you're in an inner city, you're trapped there. No, you're not trapped there. And as a counter to identity politics and to impotence and cynicism, offer this. This, of course, means that one of the things I'd like to see, I've been talking to a lot of Republicans about actually doing this, but something we could do as well, is to say we've got to start rejecting race and ethnicity as in any kind of an integrating term. It's interesting, a lot of people on the radical left say race is just a social construct. And I say, okay, fine, then we're all black, we're all white. This woman out in Seattle who claimed to be black, okay, fine, whatever. I testified before Congress some years ago on the census, and I pointed out there are like 43 sort of ethnic identifications. You're Pacific Asian, you're this black, you're this Hispanic, and I never fill those things out. But I came up with this idea actually about 40 years ago. What would happen if every white person simply put down on the form they have to fill out that they're black or they're something else? You could completely screw the system. They would have to come up with Nuremberg-type race laws to try to figure out what you are. You'd screw them completely. Speaking about screwing the system completely, Charles Murray has a new book out that's building on some more stuff about permissionless progress. There's another friend of mine who did a book by that title. And this is the notion that there are only so many bureaucrats to enforce regulations. Silicon Valley was built on just do it. It was based on, the people who were doing that sort of stuff didn't even think about asking permission. They just did it, right? That was the mindset of these folks. It was wonderful. So and Charles Murray has a whole book now on how you can do what I would call civil disobedience, or he might call civil disobedience. I'd say countering government disobedience with actually ignoring them. He's going to be on a panel out at Freedom Fest for us. So those of you who get out to Freedom Fest, come to that panel. Finally is presenting a positive vision of the future. Because that's what's going to give people really the fuel. I think Will likes to talk about the morality of the value of hope, that the future offers something for everybody. Whether you're an inner city kid, whether you're a new Hispanic immigrant, whether you're a middle class person, whatever. That's what the future offers. And this is how adults tend to think about the future. This is how kids tend to think about the future. I think this is the reality. That's what the world can be and should be. And finally, in order to set the spark, there needs to be an avant-garde. Sparks, social change don't just occur automatically. There's no Weltgeist out there. Well, maybe there is, but change occurs because there are agents of change. There are people out there advocating these things. I like to talk to the Silicon Valley types and say, guys, your values are not going to propagate on their own. You have to actually propagate them. That's where everyone in this room comes in, that we have to be activists in pushing these values and creating these values and telling people these are the values that if you value your own life, if you value your prosperity, if you value your children, these are the values that you must accept consciously, and you must not accept anything else from others who try to undermine those values. This is the future that we're aiming at. This is what is at stake. I thank you for your attention. I hope I've ended on a positive note, and I'll have a few minutes for questions.
Hi, what do you think about cryptocurrencies and the role they could play?
Cryptocurrencies, I love it. In fact, do we accept we accept crypto? Yes. Yeah, we accept Bitcoin. And by the way, this is very important. No donation to the Atlas Society is too large, okay? No donation is too large. So, give as much as you have. Or can.
All right, thanks, Ed. Thank you very much for that
Okay.
view of our culture.
Thank you, folks.